Copyright. It's complicated, but this presentation will give you a bit of a start on it, and the module itself will provide you with other sources of detailed information on copyright. So, what is copyright? Well, it's an exclusive legal right given to the creator of original works of authorship, both published and unpublished works. This information can be found on the copyright.gov site. So, exclusive legal right to do what, you ask? To prepare derivative work based on the original work, to distribute copies of the works to the public, to perform the work, to display the work publicly. And in the case of sound recordings, this means utilizing digital audio transmission. But what are the types of works protected by copyright? Here's a list of them. As you can see, literary works, music works, dramatic works, and so on. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, there's not enough categories here. Maybe mine doesn't come under this. Well, that's why you have to look at these categories a bit broadly. For example, the Copyright Office on the site gives the example of a computer program. So where would that fit? They say maybe under literary works. More interesting is what is not protected by copyright. Ideas. Even though they are the beginnings of all things, they are not protected by copyright. And neither are procedures, methods, systems, processes, concepts, principles, discoveries, or devices. Why not ideas? Ideas are intangible, and in order to be copyrighted, works must be in a tangible form of expression. So once you take that idea, you put the idea to paper and maybe it turns into a book, now you have a copyrightable material. Other things that cannot be copyrighted include titles and names, short phrases or slogans, and familiar symbols or designs. Mere variations of typographic ornamentation, lettering, coloring, mere listing of ingredients or contents. Not sure about how that affects Grandma's special recipe for apple pie. Also, works consisting entirely of information that is common property and containing no original authorship. So that's a summary of what's not covered by copyright. The next question is, do I have to register to get my copyright? What do you think? Well, the answer is not necessarily. Copyright is secured automatically once your work is created and fixed in a tangible form. Now, there are advantages of copyright registration. It establishes the public record of the copyright claim, and this can be very important in a situation in which you must file an infringement suit in court. You can only do this after you have the public record of your copyright. But who can register? Anyone whose work is protected by U.S. copyright law, regardless of nationality. Check out the site to see the stipulations, conditions, and clarifications on this note. While we're talking about registration, if you find pictures or journal notes in your garage, it doesn't mean you can register copyright for those pictures or journal notes unless you own the rights to the work, and that could be by will or by inheritance. Plainly said, physical possession does not mean ownership. Now that digital media has grown exponentially, how will this affect us as students? Technologies of today, we have so many ways of remixing works that have already existed and using audio and video and things to bring together media in a new way. What can we do? Are we going to be stifled? In a nutshell, and especially in educational situations, copyright is way too rigid. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't foster the new culture, the new digital age in which we're living. So, fair use came into existence. Fair use is a doctrine. It has been incorporated into Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. We're going to talk a little bit more about fair use. And one wonderful site to get information on fair use is the MediaEducationLab.com. According to Renee Hobbs and her co-authors, fair use is the most important tool in copyright for educators. It is intended to balance the rights of users with the rights of owners. by encouraging the widespread and flexible use of cultural products. This comes from a document that is available to you at the end of this module called The Cost of Copyright Confusion for Media Literacy. Because copyright law does not really specify how to apply fair use, it gives flexibility for how fair use applies to users. This condition is very helpful to users. However, the flexibility needs to be treated with fairness, so there are things that have to be considered. There are 4 factors that are discussed in the literature, and these include the purpose and character of the use, the nature of the work used, the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole, the economic effect, the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. Now this makes very good sense because consider yourself a creator of a work. You may have spent a lot of money in developing your work and suddenly somebody else uses it. Well, that is definitely going to infringe on your market or the value of your work. So this is a fairness issue. The 2 key questions that need to be answered when interpreting fair use. 1, did the unlicensed use transform the material taken from the copyrighted work by using it for a different purpose than that of the original? Or did it just repeat the work for the same intent and value as the original? That needs a little explanation. What do we mean by transformative? Well, the law suggests that to be transformative, you'd need to add something significant to the original work, something of value. The purpose would need to be different. Perhaps the purpose of the original work was to entertain, but you transform it to use for the purpose of education. 2, was the material taken appropriate in kind and amount, considering the nature of the copyrighted work and of the use? It might help at this point to look at some examples of activities that have been regarded as fair use. This comes from a report of the Register of Copyrights on the General Revision of the U.S. Copyright Law, and you can find it at the URL on screen. What? Well, fair use could be in the case of a quotation of excerpts in a review of criticism. What for? Well, the use could be for illustration or comment. One example. Another one, quotation of short passages in a scholarly or technical work. What's that used for? To illustrate or clarify the author's observations. Another example, some of the content of the work parodied for the purpose of parody. A summary of an address or article with brief quotations might be used for a news report. Fair use. Reproduction by a library of a portion of a work. What would that be used for? Fairly? To replace part of a damaged copy, for example. Reproduction by a teacher or a student of a small part of work. To illustrate a lesson. Reproduction of a work in legislative or judicial proceedings of reports. For reporting purposes. Incidental and fortuitous reproduction in a newsreel or broadcast of a work located in the scene of an event being reported, obviously for news or broadcast. These are all examples provided to you in the copyright site. Complicated and confusing? Yes, it can be. Some organizations are doing something about the confusion. For example, the Society for Cinema and Media Studies provides guidelines for media scholars for considering whether using, for example, still images from a film is appropriate to use in a scholarly publication for scholarly or educational purposes. Their statement of fair use best practices will be made available to you in this module. Another wonderful example is the Center for Social Media at the School of Communication at American University. They have put forth a code of best practices in fair use for media literacy educators. Their mission is to help educators interpret the complicated copyright doctrine for fair use. Remember that the Copyright Office cannot give you permission. The office suggests that if you cannot get permission from an owner of a copyright before you need to use the material, and you're not sure that fair use applies, then it's always wise to consult an attorney. Even if fair use covers you, it's always polite to give credit where credit is due. Other sources, as mentioned before, will be provided in this module to give you more coverage on the topic. We'll also be talking about Creative Commons and public domain.